if you don't accept responsibility for everything, what you're doing is you're trying to blame someone else. And even if it is somebody else, you can't fix somebody else. You can only fix you.
Welcome to the Leadership Transformations Podcast. I'm your host, Nikki Swan, Principal Consultant with Peridot Circle Consulting. In this podcast, we explore personal leadership journeys and transformations with impactful, innovative, and talented leaders. Leading the interview today is Linda Linfield, Founder and Principal Consultant with Peridot Circle Consulting. Linda specializes in executive leadership and leadership team development. With decades of high-level leadership coaching, Linda helps leaders and aspiring leaders extend their wisdom to achieve career breakthroughs at the top levels of organizations. Today, we are fortunate to have David Berg join us. David Berg started his career as a U.S. Navy flight officer, eventually transitioning to business and technology, where he worked for more than 25 years as a chief information officer for high-tech companies like IBM, Unisys, and Sun Microsystems. Known for his leadership ability as well as his technical expertise, especially in global internet social systems, David's path took him from computer test tech 1 to chief information officer over the course of just 18 years at IBM. Upon retirement about 18 years ago, David leveraged his passion for coaching, training, and empowering the next generations of leaders by creating the Leadership Development Institute, a leadership training program for technology professionals and executives. To date, he has empowered, inspired, and transformed more than 1,200 technology professionals from more than 115 companies. Thanks for joining us, David.
You're welcome.
So, Dave, your career trajectory has been a very interesting one. And I remember you telling the story about how you started your career as a radio tube test operator.
When I came, they were now in the process of switching from vacuum tubes to transistors. And then finally to, today, the chips, little bitty things.
Yeah.
So that's what I was doing. So we were still building vacuum tube computers when I arrived.
So when you were doing that job, how would you characterize that job? Was that job a boring job? It sounds kind of boring to me. Was it?
Extremely boring.
Extremely boring, right?
Extremely boring.
But you didn't let that get in the way of having a good attitude, right?
Exactly.
So this is an interesting thing, right? I think a lot of times when we start our career, at least this is what I'm hearing from people, they know they're capable of doing much more than they're currently doing, and they get frustrated when they have to spend a lot of time doing boring jobs. And one of the things Nikki said in your introduction was it only took you 18 years to go from this boring entry-level beginning job that
who nobody knew
to the top of the organization. And I think you cracked the code on how to get noticed and recognized as being a high performer. And I'd like you to tell us a little bit about that. How do you start where you started and capture the attention of those who have basically the power to give you interesting opportunities, the kinds of opportunities that you'd rather have than continuing to do the mundane job that you started with?
I didn't even know that was important, that people like and trust you. I had no concept of what was needed. But I'd had a couple of principles in my mind. The first principle was always have a good attitude. Second principle, you are always the person that is in charge, and therefore, if anything goes wrong, you can't blame anybody except yourself. Those are the kind of two principles I ran with, not understanding the implication of that.
Right. So always have a good attitude, and as the primary principle, and then the secondary principle is if anything went wrong, take ownership for it.
That's right. Yeah, and I figured out that if you didn't take ownership, see, a couple of problems that a lot of people have. One is they don't like what they're doing and they complain about it. And as soon as you start complaining, then you blaming somebody else. So you can't blame anybody else. If you don't like what you're doing, then you better figure out how to like what you're doing until you change what you're doing, right? It's nobody else's job to do that.
Yeah.
Right?
Mm-hmm.
So those are the kind of two guiding principles I had. Now, over time, I have actually figured out what it is that, and what's important.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't think I really understood that until I got into all this leadership stuff as to what is really happening, right?
You were kind of taken into people leadership, being able to direct the work of others. You were taking into that, I would say, kind of kicking and screaming, right? The first time you were offered a management job, you said, no way.
I was in love with technology and the technical work. Ands and ors, exclusive ors, binary kind of stuff. All that was kind of interesting. And so I didn't want to do anything else. I loved it. At first I didn't like it at all because it was a nonsense job. You could have had a kindergarten student doing what I did.
Right.
But when I did that, I had hope that this big company had better jobs for me, not knowing exactly what they were, but I knew why would they pay me the money they're paying me to do a job that a 3-year-old could do?
Right. Right.
So in some ways it might have been some sort of test that I eventually passed.
I don't think they set it up as a test, but I do think it's a test to see if you can stick with a job that is repetitive but needs to be done, and if you can be responsible. And so you proved you could be responsible, and people around you noticed. And then the idea is, well, if Dave can do this for himself, maybe he can help other people do it too, right?
Yes, and one of the things I was gifted with, whatever it was, that I got really good really quick on technology. Mm-hmm. And I could do things that others had trouble with. I can almost visualize what the problem is with a computer without ever taking out a oscilloscope to start trying to find out what isn't right, because I had a systems orientation. Mm-hmm. And I could kind of figure out where the problem was before I could find the problem.
Right.
And I had a sense of where did I have to put your probes on the right thing. Then you can see the problem. But the problem is finding out where you put the probes.
Right.
All this circuitry right. So the other thing I figured out that once I was asked to move into management, which I didn't want to do. And I found out right away that was a good deal, and I was stupid not to have decided to do it to begin with. Because two things happened, two big benefits right off. The first benefit, we had 8 or 10 people who were as smart or maybe smarter in certain areas than I did. And they wanted to teach me what they knew. And I loved to learn. So here it was, I had these people that were interested in teaching me, and I was anxious to learn. What about the new stuff, right? The second thing that I learned is that I made the assignment. I had 8 or 10 people. We had to do work for the department, so I was given the work, I now knew what I had to do. And so I would pick the best work for me and then pass the rest off. So I'm thinking, isn't that nice? I get to choose really what I love to do, even better, out of a set of things I like, I can pick the best. And two things happened. Because I was interested in learning and learning from those people, when I gave them an opportunity to teach me, they thought I was a great manager because I paid attention to them. Not that I was paying attention to them. I was learning stuff from them, not necessarily learning about them, but in that experience, what I found is that they were thinking, this is some great guy. I'm a great guy. I'm just
Dave, I have a question about this. I've never asked you this before, because you've talked about having the opportunity to do work that you really like to do. And I know that you really enjoy influencing other people and tackling the bigger problems. And that's something that you were able to lean into because you had a team of staff working on other things. Did you also pay attention to what other people were good at and what they were interested in doing as you made the assignments?
Yes, I think so. But in the beginning, that was not the primary goal. The primary goal was kind of self-oriented. That first experience, let me tell you what happened. I found that people were more interesting than the technology. The technology I could predict, and I could see the systems and all that working. And people, how do they work? I mean, there's no rhyme or reason how they work when it seems like that, right? So then I would say that I took a lifelong interest in how people work, because I know how computers work. And I guess I've always had this idea that learning how things work. And the biggest challenge I had was learning how people work, including myself.
Which is so interesting. It's fascinating to me because, sometimes people, they'll say things like, I'm not cut out to be a good leader. I don't care enough about people to be a good leader. And what you're saying right now is that's not how you started either. You didn't start out by being interested in other people. You started out by being interested in your own stuff, the things that you could do better, or things you could get paid more for, or have more discretion in where you spent your time. And then in the process, you became more interested in other people. I think that should be heartening to others to know they don't have to be born with a natural inclination to support others, that they can be content to let that grow over time, or recognize that it may grow for them over time with a little investment, right?
Yes, this idea of the brotherhood of man and the connections we have and the value there of each individual was another reason it helped me, in this process of moving forward. Mm-hmm. And I would have to say that it took me a long time, and I didn't understand all the intricacies of this until, I was well into the leadership program, and it became clearer and clearer what were the basic ingredients to make a person successful. And I mean, when I say successful, I mean successful in life, right? The work is only a part of life. How to be successful in life, right? Mm-hmm. And that's why I started I didn't know exactly how it meant, but I did know something, that people were very important in your life. And I kind of figured out that the quantity and quality of people in your life was directly proportional to your success in life. Mm-hmm. If you had high quality relationships, and you had a lot of relationships that are high quality, you are guaranteed to be successful in whatever you do. You just can't not be successful, especially if you have the attitude that, you're in charge, and you decide, nobody's to blame except you. If something is going wrong, it's you. Now, I take it to an extreme, right? I have to tell you a story. One day, one of my sons, he was maybe 16, 17 or something like that. He'd borrowed his mother's car and gone to school, and he came home. And he came to me and said he had an accident. And I said, no problem. You'll pay for it. He said, but hey, Dad, it was my fault. I said, well, tell me about it. Well, I was coming home, and he had a couple of school kids in the car. And he said, as I was turning the corner, a little girl ran out in the road, and I had a swerve, and I ran into the curb. And I said, I don't believe that. Why don't you just go to your room and you figure out what the real story is? And when you get the real story, come on back down. And he stomped up to the right. And he goes back. Okay, Dad. It wasn't exactly, but there's a little dog ran out in the road. I said, back to your room. I know exactly what happened. It had rained. He took the corner too fast, put the brakes on, and just slides into the curb, bends the wheel. So he groaned and groaned, and he finally came to truth, but he groaned and groaned about it. A month later, he had my truck, and by the way, I made him pay for it, right? A month later, he had my truck. He's driving my truck, and he pulls up to a red light, and the guy behind him doesn't stop and piles in the back of my truck. And he comes home gleeful that it wasn't his fault. I said, no, you don't get out of this. It was your fault. He said, how could it be my fault? I would just stop right there. I said, have you ever run a red light? Well, yes. You should have run that one. You were in the wrong place at the wrong time. I don't care about the guy that ran into you. You're paying for the truck. It's you. So that's been a principle of mine that says, if you don't accept responsibility for everything, what you're doing is you're trying to blame someone else. And even if it is somebody else, you can't fix somebody else. You can only fix you. So don't go there. Once you blame someone else, then you have a bad attitude. And your attitude, now I've figured out that your attitude drives your behavior, whether you like it or not. Yeah. If you've got a sour attitude, your behavior is sour. And so that affects your whole way of life, right? So I think with those two real principles, you're always in charge and you always have a good attitude no matter what you do. And if you don't like what you're doing now, it'll get better. Or figure out how you don't like what you're doing, make it fun somehow or other. Yeah. There's not an option to not like what you're doing.
So it's interesting with your son, it would have been pretty easy to side with him and say, yeah, it was the other person's fault. The state, the police probably cited the other person and said it was the other person's fault. But you were interested in your son's success in life.
If you're not totally to blame for whatever life brings, or totally,
you still take responsibility, right?
You can't fix it.
Yeah.
So you can't fix what isn't part of you. That's the only thing you can fix is you. You can't fix somebody else, right? So I wanted to plant that in his head. He thought he was getting away with it, that someone else was going to pay for it. No.
It's also interesting to think about when you borrow someone else's car, even if someone else hits you, you're still responsible for it. And that's true in management too, right? When things aren't going right or they're not happy with the direction of the company or the success of the company, they want to point upstairs to higher levels of leadership and say, oh, it's because they weren't articulate in the vision, or they didn't have good strategy, or they want to point fingers at why things are going wrong. And I think one of the reasons you were invited to share the leadership mantle is because you always took extreme accountability for whatever was going on in your part of the organization and not in your part of the organization.
In fact, the more I learned about myself and people, the more I wanted to share that to give them an idea, because kind of accidentally I found this secret. It was not a secret. Mm-hmm. I found it accidentally and still didn't know what it all was. Now I've gone back and looked at it, and essentially what it is, it's your behavior. Mm-hmm. Your behavior drives your success in life, totally. So how do you have good behavior?
Your attitude drives that behavior. So you made the connection between your attitude, your behavior, and your success.
I didn't understand that in the beginning.
Right.
But now I clearly understand it.
So tell us the other story, the one I'm really eager for you to share.
Okay. I ran the systems organization of the data center, and my boss was the chief information officer, had the data center and had applications and all those kind of things, right? And was at IBM, and IBM decided they were going to consolidate from some of the smaller machines to bigger ones. And since I was in charge of systems, then my job was to bring in the big machines and consolidate the little ones onto it, right? Which was not a difficult job, so I did that. Got the big computers and started moving stuff off the little computers, etc. And what I didn't realize I was doing at the time, I was doing the technical stuff, but I was killing the people, because the people had a way of doing their job and at the operational level, and they had like 20 computers. That means there's 20 computer operators. And now when I go to 4 computers, only 3 computer operators. There's still all the tape drives and all the paper that's got to be done and all that kind of stuff. So what I did is I consolidate the good work and didn't change the bad work. And so some of the people that were doing the good work are now doing the bad work, right? And it got to be such a mess. IBM, they had a policy, you could speak to the chairman, you could write him a letter and say, hey, management is screwing me up. And so we said, now I wasn't running the operations. I was the guy that was planning how the operations would look. So I thought I was doing exactly what I was supposed to do. It got so bad that there was a third level operations manager, and one day he just didn't come in, and my boss couldn't get him to come back. He just has to quit because it was such a mess, right? And who created the mess? Me, right? It was a mess, right? So, the CIO was trying to get it fixed. So he tried for a couple of months and finally called me in the office and said, hey, you caused this problem. You go fix it. You got the job. The guy that left, you're now in charge of that. These 200 and so operations people. I said, okay. So what do? I figured out that the problem was they didn't trust us. And they had good reason not to trust us, right? So I talked to the head HR guy and got him to give me a really good HR person. And I said, here's what we're going to do. We're going to put a program together, and I'm going to take, over the next year, I'm going to take like 20 of these operations people off site, for like 3 or 4 days. And I'm going to have my management team managing them off site, right? And off site, they're playing games and that kind of stuff, right? So I wanted the operators to get a sense of who the managers are, and that they start to trust one another. And then at the very end, I came in and I said, hey, I want to talk to you about what IBM thinks a manager is and what they expect and blah, 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 that kind of stuff, right? So it took me almost 2 years to get the problem fixed.
Did you rotate through that so that all the operators ended up having that experience with the managers?
Yeah, they did it all. 200. I kept going.
Mm-hmm.
I did once a month. And the idea of the once a month was because it was going to take a long time. So that was a huge success. It took a couple of years to fix it. It only took a few months to screw it up, right? And then, the boss said, fix it, and I fixed it. And so later I got promoted to the chief information officer. Maybe that was part of it. I don't know. Again, they liked me, right? And there were a couple of people that were, in every case when they promoted me, there was always someone more qualified. Always. In some cases I didn't want the job, and I point to the fact that, hey, this guy's more qualified than me. This guy, in fact, when I became the data center manager, I was a programmer doing system development, right? I was a kind of a third level manager in that area. And my boss came to me and said, I want to tell you about your new job. It's now we're going to consolidate the data centers here in General Products Division, and you're in charge. I said, I don't even know what you said. How can I do that? Explain a little bit more about this, right? He said, well, they're going to take this group and this group and going to put them together. And I said, who's the manager of this group? They give me a name. I said, that guy's more qualified than me. Why me? What about, well, they don't like this guy. What about this guy? He's more qualified than I. You know, why me? I said, well, they don't like these guys. They like you. So you got it.
So that's interesting, right? Like being a person that your leaders can count on, who they like to work with, counts for more. It's not that education or certifications aren't valued or important, but when it comes to making a decision about who to promote, the level of trust your own leaders have of you trumps the level of education or experience or certifications a person has.
Well, if you go back and look now, you know, I guess it's maybe 30 or 40 years that they've figured out that there's more than IQ, it's EQ, you know, the emotional intelligence. The emotional intelligence actually is your behavior. You know, however that you don't think about your behavior, you behave from your emotional intelligence, right? And they've figured out that the emotional intelligence in the scheme of things is worth about 80% compared to the IQ. So your brain's worth about 20% of your success. The emotional intelligence is worth 80% in your success. So you look at this and say, why are you spending all this time on skills? I mean, skills, if you got any brains at all, if you do a job for 5 years, you're skilled, right? What else do you need, right? What you need to work on is your behavior. People need to like you and trust you, right? That's important. You get people liking you and trusting you. And, you know, in some ways, it's easy to say, but it's hard to do because your emotional brain doesn't let you be in charge. So somehow or other, you got to reprogram your emotional brain. If you get it reprogrammed right and you have a good attitude, then your behavior is just perfect, right? Almost.
So Dave, one of the things I've noticed about you too, so, you know, you're talking about relationships and emotional intelligence and also being trusted and liked. And there's another thing I've noticed about you and your work style. Yes, you're very inclusive of others. You're always looking for talent. You're always nurturing that talent along, and we'll talk more about that. I've also noticed that when you have a task to do or an assignment that you have agreed to take on, you start early and you move really quickly. You don't wait for a deadline. You are quick to act. It's partially how you win the trust of others, but I also think it gives you a chance to iterate before the deadline.
Yes.
And to involve others in the process. Is that right?
Yes, I think that's right. And the other thing I've figured out is that, you know, when you involve the right people, they know better than you. You know, you think you know everything and you know how to do it, but once you involve people that got experience and, you know, the right kind of behavior and that kind of stuff, you know, it just makes it nicer, and you get something better.
Mm-hmm.
For example, one of the things when I was the chief information officer at OC Tanner, I was charged with making the company agile. I was talking agile, right? Which is mostly in the programming sense, you know, doing it in an agile way rather than the normal way. Mm-hmm. So what I did is I picked a couple books, and at every staff meeting I had for about probably a year, I had one of my staff members responsible to train the rest of us on chapter at a time. So every staff meeting, we were talking about agile, right? And chapter 1, chapter 2, chapter 3. We just went through it, right? Mm-hmm. One of the things I like doing is I like taking my staff and playing golf with them. And during the golf, we would teach each other. You know, I would kind of teach them a little bit, they would teach me a little bit. So I made it a fun experience as we were moving to new things. kind of, just just all of us have this good fun experience.
It's also fun to hear about how you had a remit, something you needed to accomplish that you didn't already know how to do. And so you figured out a way to learn it and to teach your staff at the same time. And you didn't get all precious about having to learn it first or having to be an expert before you could teach others. You just rolled up your sleeves and got in there with them and learned it together.
Yes.
Love that.
So the other thing I've learned over time that I think is important, that you as an employee have two enemies, really bad enemies. The first enemy is yourself, and the second one is your manager. I say, well, why is that? I say, well, let me just tell you why. Because you've learned to do a good job. Such a good job, you're afraid to try anything new. Because you get praises from your manager, right? Oh, what a great job. Yeah. Feels good. I know how to do it. I get all this recognition for it. That's your first enemy, you. Because you're afraid to go out and learn something else. Why are you afraid to learn something else? Because you may be afraid that you won't get as good at it. Dumb. That's dumb. If you spend time, you'll get good at it, right? And the second reason is that your manager doesn't want you to go because you do the same thing for him. Why would I want you to go somewhere? Why would I want to help you to get something more when you're my ideal employee? If you don't understand that you have two enemies and you got to be aware of both of them, right? You are kind of doomed because eventually whatever you're doing will be old. Then you got the problem. Maybe then it's too late. You should have seen ahead and said, yeah, I'm interested in doing that. Yeah. Then be good at that. So that's another.
I often talk to people about not getting too attached to being so excellent in your current role during your current responsibilities, because then you just get better and better and better at doing things that are in the past instead of getting better at doing things you need to do in the future.
That's right.
Yeah.
And people don't think about it that way.
Right.
Yeah, but I do.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's so why am I so good at both the technology and the people thing? Because in some ways, I look at people like they're fancy technology. In their head is more than ands and ors and exclusive ors. It's something more extreme.
Well, I know you love it when the light comes on for them and they sense that they can actually do more than they believe they could do. So that brings us to Dave, after 30 years in the technical arena, rising to the top and actually operating at the top of technology in several organizations. You could have ridden off into the sunset, enjoyed your retirement, spent all your time traveling, and you have done a fair bit of traveling and enjoying, but you decided that you weren't finished in influencing people in the technical field. In fact, you have a huge commitment to developing the next generation of talented IT and other technical professionals. And so you and some colleagues who were similarly committed decided to create an organization, the Association for Information Management, and through that organization to develop leaders. And you instituted the Leadership Development Institute before you had even retired. Do you want to tell us a little bit about your motivation there, what you were hoping to achieve, and what you've been able to achieve over the last few years, last 20 years to be exact?
Yeah. Well, I would say kind of the motivation was, being the top guy in the IT organization, you're seeing all these people work for you. There was a tendency for technical professionals to be rooted in things rather than people. They would rather talk to their computer than talk to a person, right? And knowing how important it was for being successful with relationships, how do I help? Starting with my own people that work for me, right? And then broadening that to Utah, all the CIOs have the same problem. So it was essentially, the simplest way to say it is to take nerds and kind of make them human beings again, right? Which was quite a challenge. Right? And when we started this program, almost 20 years ago now, I initiated the program, and I got two other CIOs from different organizations. Neil was one of them, Neil Nicolaisen, and then another one, Steve Welgard. Steve was kind of retired, right? He was in the beginning help, and we decided, hey, what we're going to do, we want something local, we want it inexpensive, and we don't want people to have to fly someplace, and spend a few days and spend a lot of money. So said, here's what we'll do. We'll start it with the three of us, and we'll do it over lunch. And then maybe we start with a lunch of 2 or 3 hours or something like that, right? And there was only three of us that did it. It was me, Neil, and Steve.
Mm-hmm.
And what we did is talked about relationships again. It was all about relationships. It was the relationship with your boss, the relationship with the peers, and the relationship down. That's how it started. And the first program we ran at no cost. I think we got 10 to 12 people, just try it out. They loved it. I think we decided to do it for 3 months, but it was no more than just the three of us. Neil would do 1 month, I'd do a month, and Steve would do a month, right? That was it. And then we decided that it might be good to expand it. So we went to 4 months because people loved it. People loved it, right? Just us, right? Then I've always kind of had the role that I ran that whole program, even with Neil, doesn't matter how I ran it, but I kind of worked with Neil. So then I decided that since I liked it so much, we could expand it. And then my job was to find, high level executives in IT that were interesting. That could hold someone's attention, that was maybe a little humorous and could make a point. Right? So that's kind of been my job is over time is to manage that program.
Well, and proof of that is even during the couple of COVID years when we couldn't meet together, you were able to maintain enrollment and hold the line on engaging people and helping them to engage in their career, advancing their career trajectory, even when obstacles were kind of stacked up against them. And I think they really appreciated that. Yeah, I have one other question it's a follow-on to the AIM question and your LDI program that you run. It's about the LDI Plus program. That's a more recent program. You've been running that.
Yeah.
We're coming up on 10 years, you and I. And that program was built on the back of the initial program. And this one's focused on developing the individual characteristics people need to advance their careers, their opportunities for the kinds of jobs they want, and also to be promoted if that's their goal, right? So I thought you might like to talk a little bit about that program and what you're hoping to accomplish there, and maybe share some of the successes you've seen over the last few years in that program.
Well, let me start out by saying I kind of knew what I wanted to do, because after I'd done the LDI for 10 years, I wanted a program that really figured out where this person stood in their leadership development, which meant I had to do a 360 survey, because most people didn't understand completely what the reality is with them, right? So you had to do that. No, I'm not an HR person, right? But I knew that's what I wanted to do.
Right.
So I then researched a bunch of the surveys, and I liked the leadership circle. I liked that survey. So I decided to go get qualified for it with the intention of starting a program that would charge for consulting, essentially would find out where they are, and then would spend an hour or so with each individual and help them precisely in where they are. with the idea that I might want to involve some others until I went back. I went to the program and met Janet and Linda, and they're from Salt Lake City. I'm thinking, maybe we could do something together, because this is a brand new program that I'm putting together. I knew what I wanted to do, and they had some experience. So we started that, and it has been highly successful. And we've modified it a little bit. In fact, it was Linda and Janet that talked me into the Berkman survey. It took a little talking.
But I think we have a really great program, and we've produced some
in the end, it's
very strong results, right?
Yeah, I believe you. The program was good. Yeah, so it's turned out really well. And I think we can see more people are more likely to make progress in their success in their life. I keep saying life because work is only a part of it.
Mm-hmm.
Success in their life in this program, because it's hard to refute what you don't have and what you need. I mean, I can tell you what you need, but do you believe it? I can tell you what I did, and if you want to do what I did, you'll be successful, right? I know that, but do you believe that? And do you want to be successful, right? Yeah. Or is it too hard? You like who you are and you don't want to change. You like your behavior. Others don't, but you do, right? So I think you have a better shot at getting someone to change behavior once you've taken them through the 360. And I think we can see that. Not that the LDI is a bad thing at all. It's a good thing.
No. This is just the next level, taking your own behavior, your own self-awareness, your awareness of others, your ability to manage yourself, the ability to manage the expectations and perceptions of others.
Right.
Just take it to a new level. So, and Dave, you have been and you continue to be an inspiration to so many. I keep wondering if you'll ever retire. I don't think you will. I think just one day you'll fall over, or you'll I'm
going to die with my boots on.
You'll die with your boots on.
I'm not going to die now because I don't have my boots on.
There you go. Well, it's been a pleasure today to talk to you and get your thinking on leadership and development. And there's so much that people can learn from you. There's so much Janet and I and Nikki learn from you, and just really appreciate the opportunity to work with you as you continue to live your mission to help other people succeed, not only in their professions, but in their lives.
Yeah, thank you. It's been a pleasure working with you all. It's been a lot of fun. I've enjoyed it. It's not work to me.
Right.
It's enjoyable pleasure, right? And it's kind of fun to see people catch on.
Yeah.
That's so rewarding. Well, thank you for being with us today. It has been a pleasure, and I've learned a lot just listening to you. I feel inspired. And to our listeners, we invite you to appreciate the experiences that have brought you here to this moment of your life's journey. And we invite you to stay open to the possibilities within you. You were meant for greater things. Until next time. At Peridot Circle, we facilitate the growth and transformation of individuals, leaders, and emerging leaders of fast-growing, tech-savvy organizations. If any of our listeners are interested in learning more about our approach to leadership coaching at Peridot Circle Consulting and how we can help transform how you show up at work, book a consult with us online at peridotcircleconsulting.com. We would love to help you and your organization achieve more than ever before.